Hello folks, this is Sula once again. Welcome to another video for Teamfight Tactics. This time we're going to be doing something a little bit different in this video. This is not footage recorded from me. This is actually footage that I pulled off of a live stream, and I'm sorry about the little follower goal, 68 days to go. This was something that this person was running on their live stream, so just have to do your best to ignore that. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be doing a look at something that I used to do for my old League of Legends videos, and that was to look at some players who were less experienced at the game. I used to do a series called Bronze Medals for League of Legends where we would look at gameplay in Bronze Elo and just try to focus on what players could do to improve. And that's what we're going to be doing in this game as well. This is taken from a ranked game at Bronze 1 Elo. Sometimes I just enjoy looking at different people on live stream, trying to get a sense for what the gameplay looks like at different skill levels. And, you know, people get so used to seeing the people at the absolute top of the ladder, it's very easy to forget about the fact that that's not at all typical of what normal gameplay looks like. Most people are not playing the game in like Challenger or Grandmaster. Most people are much further down on the ladder. And I think it's useful to keep that in mind sometimes because you can get a really skewed understanding of what the gameplay looks like when you're only looking at people at the very top of the ladder. So the goal here is not to make fun of people who are less experienced. I mean, I guess you can have a chuckle if that's, you know, your thing, but the goal is more to look at what people who are less experienced at the game can do to try to improve. That was always the goal behind the series that I did when I did the bronze medals, and that's what we're going to be looking at here. So with that in mind, what we're going to be trying to do in this game is looking at 7 bad habits that people who are less experienced at teamfight tactics often find themselves engaged in. So 7 bad habits of newcomer TFT players is how we'll refer to this. And I just have this gameplay on in the background because this is going to serve as an example of, as I said, people who are less experienced and some of the mistakes that they might be making, which are very common in kind of lower tier games of people who haven't played the game as much. As mentioned before, this is a ranked game, and the player that the live stream footage is taken from was in Bronze 1 Elo at the time. There's also a written version of this article if you prefer to read as opposed to watch. I will go ahead and link that in the video description if you want to check out a written version of this article. Okay, so first point I want to make, and that is newcomer TFT players are not very good at understanding kind of the basic principle behind teamfight tactics, which I'm going to call here the carry tank utility dynamic. What do I mean by that? Well, the basic idea is you always, whenever you're building a team in teamfight tactics, you need to be thinking about what kind of 3 things. Who is my carry unit or units? Who is the tank or tanks on this team? And then what utility units do you have as well? And no matter what set you might be playing in teamfight tactics, no matter what units you might be playing, you always want to be thinking about these things. Like, no matter where you are, you always want to be thinking about what unit am I playing through? Who is my carry unit? Who is my damage dealer? And then how do I protect that unit? Which you do by having some combination of frontline units will stand there and absorb damage, and then also utility units that can provide crowd control or other functions to the team. Maybe they provide an attack speed buff, or they're healing units or that sort of thing. So carry tank utility. This is one of the biggest issues that I see for people that are new to this game and still trying to learn, is they don't identify who their carry unit is. You need to have some kind of unit that you're playing through. You can have situations like the one we have right here, where this player has just kind of random their way into a 2-star Singed and a 2-star Jarvan. So like that'll work for like a couple of stages, for like maybe stage 2. But like right now, this board does not have a carry unit on it at all. So inevitably, this board is going to fall off pretty hard if they can't identify some kind of carry. I suppose that's going to be the Ezreal, I guess. But Ezreal, 1-star Ezreal with a Jeweled Gauntlet is not going to work for very long. So this is kind of the first point that I want to make. There's a severe lack of people being able to identify who their carry is. Less of an issue identifying tanks. People can generally understand which units are intended to be tanks and work around that. But not a great job of recognizing that here's my carry unit. This is the unit that I'm going to play through in the early stages of this game. One of the points I also want to try to make is you want to have your traits follow your carry, generally speaking. Now, this is a generalization to be sure, but the basic idea is the traits follow the units, not the other way around for the most part. You want to activate traits so that your carry units can carry harder, not the other way around. And yes, I'm aware there's always going to be trait bots, units that are played just to activate their traits, units you just toss in because you're trying to hit something. Of course, that's always going to be the case, but generally speaking, the traits should follow the units and not the other way around. And that's something that easily gets overlooked, even by people who have more experience in League of Legends. So for example, right now, if though this person's playing through Ezreal, maybe that's not a great example, but like let's say that they were playing through Twitch, you'd want to play Assassins to enable Twitch's damage. It wouldn't be so much the case that you're playing Assassins, so you're going to toss in Twitch. Now, I guess in some respects it's kind of a tautology because you're kind of saying the same thing two different ways, but still, the goal is, once you've identified your key units, once you have your carry, once you have protection for your carry, the whole idea is you build your traits around that and not vice versa, because ultimately the game is about playing strong units and playing strong boards more so than playing traits. The best example of this is when you get into the late game, it can often be a good idea to drop some traits in favor of just playing better units. Like oftentimes it's not worthwhile to run like a 1-cost 1-star unit just to activate a trait if you could play a 5-cost legendary unit instead. So like that's kind of that principle at work. Anyway, so first most important lesson that we often see people struggle with, or that I often see people struggle with at lower experience levels: identify your carry, identify your tanks, identify your utility units, play through your carry. So like right now, off of this carousel, this person goes ahead and takes a belt, which is not going to do anything for Ezreal, and it's not really going to do anything for his frontline units either. Like, I guess you could make a Zephyr on Singed. Might have made more sense to take that Chain Vest, because then that could turn into a Gargoyle Stoneplate, and like that is a more useful frontline item that would help play through the tanks. This person's actually going to be win streaking for the time being because they have kind of randomed their way into a 2-star Ezreal, and they have 2-star, what is it, 2-star Singe, 2-star Ezreal, 2-star Jarvan, and then they've also got Zillion in for Innovators, which is going to be strong in the early game. So this person's going to be win streaking, but it's largely just going to be off the strength of their traits, not because they've really identified the units they want to play through. All right, enough of that point. Let's continue onwards. Next point, and this is another large, broad point: newcomer TFT players don't manage the in-game economy very well. Now, this is hardly a shocker to say this. It probably makes sense that people who are new to the game have trouble managing the in-game economy. But when I watch these games that are, more on the inexperienced side, people who haven't played as much, it really drives home how they struggle with economy. Now, right now, if you're watching this and you're more experienced, you're probably seeing this person's on 9 gold, and they could have easily sold a unit to get up to 10 gold, and they don't do that. So you really want to hit those income breakpoints if you can, if at all possible. And then look at this. Oh, refreshing the shop. Why? Why are you refreshing the shop? So it would be wrong to say you should never re-roll in a situation like this. Oh, gonna refresh the shop again. Like, it would be wrong to say you should never refresh the shop like this, because clearly sometimes it is the right decision to re-roll. But here, this player just spends 4 gold re-rolling the shop early on in the game, doesn't really find anything in particular. They actually find a Sivir at 2% odds, which could be a unit to play through, although this board is not especially well configured to play into Sivir. I suppose they could play Scrap plus Striker, which, at least in this patch version of League of Legends, is fairly popular. But like, they buy the Sivir, and then look at this. They're on a full win streak. They win streaked every single round through stage 2. They should be super rich, but they have 4 gold in the bank. So their economy is in total shambles because they re-rolled twice, and they're holding a bajillion units on the bench that for no clear reason. Like, why are you holding Jarvans here? Are you playing into Jarvan? I don't know. It doesn't really fit an Innovator's board, although it would pair well with Sivir. Like, why 6 Jarvans? Why why 4 Singed? Why 4 Ezreals? Although I guess you might need to sell Ezreal and replace in order to get items off of him later in the game. But you get the idea. This economy is not being managed very well, and this player, who should be unbelievably rich at this stage in the game because they've just win streaked all through stage 2, only has 10 gold in the bank. So this is really basic to playing the game. Again, this is not going to come as a surprise to people who have played the game a lot, but economy management is super important, and it's often very, very bad at lower skill levels. I'm sure that people who have played this game a lot, if they're watching this footage, were just like cringing inside at the decision there to re-roll and then just re-roll for units and then just have them sit on the bench doing nothing. Like, I guess they picked up an Ezreal, which did basically nothing. And so now they're going to go ahead and level to 6, which actually is not a bad decision because this player is on a full win streak, and by leveling to 6 there, they're pushing tempo. They get 4 scrap plus 3 innovator in, which is actually very strong for this stage of the game. But they've dropped down to only 8 gold in the bank, which is not ideal. So they desperately need to win streak here in order to keep that streak going, just to maintain any semblance of a decent economy. So this is a basic point again, but economy management is not very good for newcomer players. The single biggest lesson that I would emphasize for people who are brand new at this game is just try to get up to 50 gold quickly and maintain 50 gold in the bank. Now, that's a great oversimplification. Obviously, that's, like I said, that's something that you kind of learn early, and then as you get better at the game, you learn about like when you want to break that habit, when it's appropriate to roll, when it's appropriate to level early to push tempo to maintain a win streak, that sort of thing. When you have a bunch of pairs on your bench and you need to roll to try to hit some 2 stars, when you get better at assessing the strength of your board relative to the rest of the lobby. And again, this is footage I captured off live stream. They tabbed out of the game there. You get the idea. Obviously, it's wrong to say, oh, you should always stay over 50 gold because that's where you get the most income. Of course, that's an oversimplification. But if you're new to the game, I do think that that's a good thing to keep in mind. If you're still learning, start by doing that. Start by getting up to 50 gold where you get the max income and just stay there. And then get used to doing that. And then from there, you can start to learn where and when it makes sense to violate that rule. So that would be my advice for newcomer players. Start simple, just start by maximizing income, and then you can learn about where to break that. But as you can see, the economy management in this game is rough, and that is also the case for many of these other players as well. If you'll keep an eye on the amount of income and the level of these other players in the lobby, you will see it's pretty shaky, which is what you would expect for people that are learning. All right, next point that I'm going to make. Newcomer Teamfight Tactics players are obsessed with 3-star units. I notice this again and again, and if you ever watch these games that are kind of at Bronze or Silver Elo, you will see everybody seems to be obsessed with 3-star units. It's just like half the lobby is going for 3 stars and trying to 3-star everything in ways that don't really make a whole lot of sense. So I've mentioned this before, that this particular player has all these Jarvans on the bench for no clear reason. It's like, are they going to be playing into Jarvan long term? Like, is this a board that's going to play into this Hextech or Striker? It doesn't feel like it. But for some reason, they've amassed 6 Jarvans. They're also holding additional Ezreals and holding additional Singed. So finally make a good decision and drop the Jarvan, which is a good decision. And oh, now re-rolling. Now gonna re-roll a little bit more at level 6. So again, the somewhat questionable economy management here. But yeah, this is just something that pops up again and again. And if you watch some of these other boards that this player whose live stream footage I've recorded, you'll notice a lot of units being held to try to 3-star on their benches as well. And I don't quite understand the obsession with 3-starring, but it is everywhere if you watch games kind of at this tier of skill level. So I can speculate about why that is. I think some people might be thinking that like the goal of the game is to get perfect units, and like the 3-star is the perfect unit, so that's the goal. But for whatever reason, this is super duper common. People just seem to want to go for the 3 stars. Maybe it's just people really, really love seeing them pop up in the store. But yeah, people just kind of go for them everywhere, even when it doesn't really make any particular sense to try and go for 3-star units. Like, does going for 3-star Singed really do a lot here? I mean, I guess it's okay, but it's not like this person has hit a ton of Singed or something. Wow, the plural of Singed, an odd word to say. Like, they have 4 of them, and it's mid-stage 3. Like, this is clearly not likely to happen, and re-rolling for it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense here. Rerolling for more units also doesn't, rerolling here just doesn't seem to make a ton of sense either. It would make much more sense to try to push to level 7 or 8, try to get, I guess, Seraphine into the comp, or potentially Jace if you could find him to get up to 5 Innovator. That would spike this board a heck of a lot harder than trying to turn a 2-star Singed into a 3-star Singed or something like that. So yeah, it's something that's very common and it doesn't make a great deal of sense, but it is something that you will see a lot of if you watch these games at this skill level. Okay, next point that goes along with this. As you see more re-rolling here, more just lighting the economy on fire for reasons that are unclear. Also, it's very painful to see the Aurelias here in the store and the Ziggs not being replaced by Aurelia. So this actually dovetails exactly into the next point I was going to make. Newcomer players don't transition into higher tier units. This is also extremely common that you will see newcomer players who are, again, less familiar with the gameplay. They will pick up units early in the shop and they will put them on their board, and then they will just stick with those units for basically the whole game. Whatever they're playing at the beginning of the game, they're still basically playing those units at the end of the game, and they very rarely change the units that they have on their board. So they are not transitioning into higher tier units. And we had the perfect example of that right there, in the sense that there was the Aurelia on the bench, and this person just opted to stick with the Ziggs because they've been playing Ziggs as opposed to selling the Ziggs and playing Aurelia. Ziggs is only in there for scrap trait. He's literally doing nothing else. And Aurelia is obviously a much, much, much better unit than the Ziggs. And it's gone past, I think, 3 or 4 Aurelias by now. Could have had 2-star Aurelia, which would certainly spike this board much harder. This board is really lacking for a carry unit. Remember how I said that was kind of the key, most important thing to have in this game? Really lacking for a carry unit. Like, is it Ezreal? Is it the Echo? I don't really know, and I don't think that the person playing this game knows either. So, like, maybe they could have moved into Aurelia and put items on Aurelia and then had her as the featured unit. Although these are not great items for Aurelia, it would still be better than a 2-star Ezreal with a jeweled gauntlet. And, oh, by the way, look at the other person's bench. Remember again how I said people just re-rolling endlessly for 3 stars in ways that don't really make sense? Yep. 8 Dariuses on their board, 8 Ashes, desperately trying to hit the 3 stars. And if they hit, then they're going to be strong. If they miss, then they'll just go out of the game in like 7th or 8th place. So this is a real issue. People stick with their units. They don't change them. They don't change up their team compositions. And this is bad in kind of 2 ways. One is they're not moving into the more expensive, higher tier units. So I mentioned before, not moving from like Ziggs, a 1-cost unit, into Aurelia, a 4-cost unit. Not starting to transition from like Ezreal as the main carry into a late game unit like Aurelia or Jinx or Jhin or Jace. You know, Ezreal can hold items for any of those units depending on how you build him. But like, so number one, not changing from one unit to the next and moving into higher tier units, but also in addition to that, not changing the team composition either. Now, it's difficult to do this. Like, it's hard to change from one team composition into another. It's one of the hardest skills to learn, and I'm not going to pretend that it's an easy skill to master. But oftentimes people will just get locked onto one team comp, like they are playing one board on stage 2, and that's just what they're going to play, and they never change into anything else. Now, you don't necessarily need to be unbelievably flexible in teamfight tactics. Sometimes you can get yourself into too much trouble by not deciding on what kind of team you're going to play. But you do want to be at least somewhat flexible so that if you see something in the shop, you can potentially pivot into alternate setups. You know, the classic example is you hit that legendary unit at 1% odds on level 7, and suddenly you have the opportunity to pivot into something different. Or when you're level 5, you hit a 4-cost unit at 2% odds, and suddenly you can build the team composition around that. So this is, again, not easy to do. This is one of the hardest skills to learn, but it is something that you should be looking to do. You do not just want to lock into one set of units on stage 2-1 and then never ever change from that the whole game, which is what this person is going to do. They identified that they were going to play Singed and Ezreal on stage 2-1, and these units will never change and they will never come out of the comp. And the goal is just to sit here and, I guess, to 3-star these units. But the problem is even 3-starring these units is not really going to do a whole lot. Like, a 3-star Ezreal with these items is not going to carry the game particularly hard. I mean, it'll help a little bit, but it's still not gonna do that much. It's also sad to see just how many 4-costs this person's going through. They have just gotten up to level 7, and then now they're just staying at level 7 and rolling at level 7. But like, what are they rolling for? It's very unclear what exactly it is they're rolling for. I guess they're looking for Singed and Ezreal and Zillion, and Blitzcrank, because those are the units they're holding on their bench. But of course, if you're trying to 3-star a 1-cost like Ezreal or a 1-cost like Singed, you should be level 5, not level 7. The odds start going down as you get higher levels. It doesn't make sense to roll for these on level 7. So this person win streaked for the first 10 rounds of the game, all of stage 2, all of stage 3, but they weren't really win streaking off of their units. They were just win streaking off of the traits. They were win streaking off of having 4 scrap and 4 innovators in at an early date. With those traits being strong in the early game. They haven't really pieced their team together in any kind of meaningful way. There you scroll by another legendary unit in Silco, who could have been grabbed at 1% odds. I don't know that Silco does a lot for this team, but has to be better than something in this board. Instead, apparently is just rolling for 3-star 1-costs at level 7. And now that they are no longer win streaking, their economy is pretty much melted down, and they are completely starved of income now. Like how much gold? They're going to get 5 gold at the start of the next round, or 6, I guess, because they're a 2-match losing streak. So they have no money, and they really have no way to level to 8. It looks like they're going to be stuck permanently at 7, and they are not close to. The only 4-cost they're playing is Seraphine. They're playing no 5-cost units. They still need 3 Singe, 3 Zillions, 3 Ezreals in order to 3-star these units. And this is a board that had everything going for it in the early game, and just has completely fallen apart here in the mid game, because they, like I said, are just struggling with the economy, struggling to identify what kind of carry units they want. They did get the Seraphine, so now they have the Innovator Bear, so that might be able to help, but clearly this is just a real mess, and the inability to transition into higher tier units has just been a gigantic problem. All right, my next point that I'm going to make here is let's talk a little bit about items, because this is another huge problem for newcomer players. Newcomer players have a huge problem of just not making items at all. Like, this is not so much an issue for this player, who's been doing a reasonably good job of it, but it's very common to just see like 5, 6, 7 components sitting on the bench not being used. So as I said, that has not been an issue so much with this player, but it's very common to just have item components going completely unused by newcomer players. They will, for whatever reason, they have difficulty making use of them. There have been surveys that the TFT developers have done that show that newcomer players really struggle with the items. It makes them feel often uncomfortable and confused. By the way, this is so many 4-costs not being picked up. But like they get confused and overwhelmed with the items and don't really know what to do with them. And so they kind of get paralyzed by indecision and just have the items sit on their bench, not being used for like ages and ages and ages. As I said, we're not seeing that so much in this game, but it's very common to see 10 billion items sitting there. It also can be the case of what I would think of as like Final Fantasy syndrome, which is like you have these items, but like people are always like, oh, I don't want to use that item, I'm going to save it for later. And then they just end up sitting there and they don't actually get used. I'm sure people who have played like traditional RPGs are familiar with that. It's like, I'll save it for later, and then the item never actually gets used. So that can be a problem. People also sometimes will sit there with lists from like, I don't know, one of the online websites for TFT, where it's like, here are the most perfect items you can get. And they will go ahead and like try to greed for best in slot items. And so they end up again with like 7 unused items on the bench, just doing nothing. It's very silly to do that, because remember, a Teamfight Tactics game is going to have roughly 20 to 25 rounds of PvP. Every stage is 5 rounds, so stage 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what, about that's like 20 rounds. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and then stage 6 is another 5 for about 25. So if you're going to play like 20 to 25 rounds in a typical game, and you have item components sit there unused for like 7, 8, 9 rounds, they're not being used for like half the game. And that's a lot of time to not have those items doing anything for you. As I said, this person's actually doing a decent job of that. They have not used their items especially well, but they are at least making use of them. So super common for people just not to make items at all, and you leave so much power off your team when you're doing that. Remember that champions scale multiplicatively with items, not additively, so multiplicatively. And units that don't have items just get absolutely destroyed by those who do. So very, very common. And even though we're not seeing it here, it's something that I see all the time. You don't have to slam items the instant you get them, but you shouldn't have more than like 2 or 3 on the bench. If you're doing that, you're probably greeding items too much. All right, next point, related point. newcomer players don't itemize their units well. So in addition to just not using items, they also tend to struggle with how to itemize well. Now, this is of course also a complicated topic. It's what is like the best item, what is the proper item to use is very situational. There's not always an easy answer. This is something that even more experienced players often disagree on, have arguments about. So this is not a simple point, but I do think that even newcomer players can try to do kind of like basic stuff to make their boards stronger. You can not be an expert at this game, and you can still make itemization choices that are going to be reasonably effective for your unit. So just walk through some examples. Ezreal's a physical damage dealer, like his abilities deal physical damage. So you want to put items on him that build out of physical damage stuff. Bows for attack speed, swords for more physical damage, gloves for additional critical strike chance. Pretty straightforward. Even if you're not building like his absolute best in slot items, if you just make items using those components, you're going to do reasonably well. Swords, bows, gloves, some combination of them, he will be reasonably effective. So just based on that, we know that the Jeweled Gauntlet is a bad choice. Jeweled Gauntlet is an item that builds out of a rod and a glove. Causes your magic damage and true damage to critically strike, which normally it can't do. Ezreal doesn't deal any magic damage, so this item is not doing anything for him. I guess it gives him a very small amount of ability power and critical strike chance. So you just, even a very basic knowledge about how Ezreal works, you can right-click on him just to see what he does. Just by like right-clicking on him, you can see, oh, this item's not going to be effective on him, and you don't have to be like an expert at this game to know that. By the way, this is the first round that this player's won in quite some time, and the reason why he wins is he rolled a Rage Blade on his scrap bow. So a good example of how having an item that's actually strong on the champion and causes Ezreal to ramp up throughout the fight makes a gigantic difference. This person's also hit Zillion 3-star, so means the Zillion time bombs are going to be stronger, but 3-star Zillion just doesn't really do much for this team comp. He's not itemized. He has no ability that's going to increase his damage. So, I mean, does 3-star Zillion do much? A little, but not a whole lot overall. So that's kind of an initial point about people not itemizing champions very well. But like, you can make reasonably decent itemization choices even without knowing much about the units. Like, we already talked about Ezreal as a physical damage dealer. If you're playing assassins, well, their abilities naturally critically strike, so stuff that builds out of gloves is going to be good on them, especially Infinity Edge. Everything except Jeweled Gauntlet, which they don't need because their abilities auto-crit already. But like assassins always want stuff that builds out of gloves. Units that are tanks, you want stuff that builds out of Chain Vest and Cloak and Belt. Again, any combination of those items is probably going to be reasonably effective. Like we had the Gargoyle Stoneplate on Singed. That has worked out pretty well in this game. Again, you can make better choices as you learn more about how the game works and you learn more about the champions, but as long as you're adhering to like basic guidelines, you'll be reasonably effective. Similarly, spellcasters, they need to cast their spells to be effective, so they're going to want rods and tears. Particularly units that have high mana costs, like in this set, Victor probably wants a Spear of Shojin because he has very high mana, and if he doesn't cast, he's not going to do anything. So even without knowing like a ton of stuff about how the game works, you can be reasonably effective just by having like basic knowledge about how champions use their stuff. By the way, this fight's kind of funny as well. They're going to get the Blitzcrank hook on that Syndra, and that, I can't remember if that's enough for this person to win this fight. I believe that it is because they managed to have some good fight RNG, and they're going to be able to clutch this one out. Once again, Ezreal rolls the Rage Blade, and he's like a billion times more effective once he has the Rage Blade. Oh, I guess he's not strong enough to cut through this tank line. I think I was remembering maybe a different fight. Maybe I was thinking that other fight where he rolled Rage Blade. Oh, well, at least it was a closer loss. So newcomer players, I mentioned, also struggle with itemization. It is one of the more complicated parts of this game, but you can be reasonably effective just by knowing kind of some basic principles about how the units work and what item components are going to be useful on them. All right, final point here that I want to make, and this is about paying attention during the game. In fact, this is a particularly important point because this person was not paying attention on the carousel, and even though they would have had second pick, they ended up with last pick. So the broader point is pay attention during the game, but I'm going to phrase it as well this way. This is how I wrote it in the written version of the report. Newcomer players don't scout other boards or reposition their units. So this is another thing that as you get more experience at the game, you'll get better at doing. But newcomer players don't scout. They don't look at the other boards. If you've been paying attention to this footage, this player has not been looking at anyone's boards for basically the entire game. So it's a total mystery what anyone is playing in any one round, and as far as repositioning to a different point. This is especially important here in set 6.5 because they have added in this set the little sword indicators that tell you who you are going to be up against next. It's usually one of 3 teams, although sometimes it can be more or less than that. So ideally, you want to keep an eye on who the other boards are you can potentially hit, because it's going to make a big difference in terms of where you might want to put these units. I believe that this player has kept their units in the exact same spot for the entirety of Stage 5. I don't think that they've moved their units around even once since this stage started. Like, they have just kind of put everybody in a big ball, which is okay. It's usually usually you clump up your units if you're trying to defend against assassins. But like, I guess this is okay. It's not awful. It does make this formation super susceptible to area of effect abilities. But the real problem is just not repositioning at all. Look, now shifting around a little bit for whatever reason. You need to keep an eye on what the other boards are doing, because positioning does matter a lot in this game. Now, you won't be able to reposition for every round if you're fiddling with your team composition. If there's a whole bunch of stuff that you have going on, obviously that means that you can't focus as much on positioning for other teams. But it's not that hard to learn. Like, it's not really that complicated. You don't want assassins to jump right on top of your carry. You want to reposition so you don't get hooked by Blitzcrank. If there's a Zephyr pointed at your unit, you want to move it out of the way. Like, this stuff is not especially difficult to learn. So it really does behoove you to keep an eye out for what other boards are doing, try to watch what the other players are doing, and be prepared to position accordingly. By the way, clutch Time Bomb by Zilean wins this fight. Otherwise Ezreal is just about to die. And that maybe keeps this person from dying there. I think they would have survived, but they probably would have been on like 5 HP. And you can see how tight this lobby is, so it's quite important that they do that. So again, as you get better at the game, as you've played more, you'll be able to spend more time scouting and can focus more on what the other teams are doing. But it really does behoove you to watch. You can always see what everyone else is doing at all points in time. And there's no reason to wait until like the last 3 rounds of the game to do that. You should have a general idea of what the other people are doing, because there's always rounds where there's nothing going on with your team. There's always rounds where you have time to do that. All right, we're getting to the ending stages of this game here, so let's talk about what's happened in the context of this game. So the big issue was, after win streaking super hard for the early stages of the game, this player unfortunately then ran into the fact that they just really never developed a carry unit to play through. I guess it's Ezreal, and he is 3-starred, but he's a 1-cost unit, and the Jeweled Gauntlet just cuts his damage enormously. So if he doesn't roll a useful scrap item, he's pretty useless in these fights. And that's kind of been the issue. This person just doesn't really have any damage. They're reasonably tanky, but they've never transitioned into more expensive units. They have 1 Seraphine on their board, no other 4 costs, and they just never transitioned at all. Oh, this is the fight I was thinking of when I mentioned before. So watch the Echo in this fight. This person on the other team is playing through a Syndra, but Echo, by dumb luck, has rolled a Quicksilver Sash, so the Echo is not going to get thrown by Syndra, and by the time that Syndra finally kills the Echo, the fight is mostly over. So the Quicksilver Sash on Echo just absolutely won this fight. It's actually pretty hilarious the way it worked out, because Echo could not be thrown back into the rest of the team for huge damage, and so that's going to turn into a victory, and I believe it locks down a top 4 finish for this person. So hey, kudos to that. There's been a lot of mistakes throughout this game, but I wanted to highlight a game that was still successful with a top 4 finish, just so that we would be able to show a game that's not like 8th or something. Now, who is going to win this game? Well, there is a team that's win streaking, and in fact, we've actually seen this team comp before. It is the player who was rolling and rolling and rolling at level 5 for 3-star syndicates. And they actually ended up hitting, and that's what happens in a lot of these less skilled games. Everybody is just like kind of somewhat cluelessly rolling for 3 stars, and someone hits. And that's what happened in this game. They hit the Ashe. They hit Ashe 3-star. So even though they completely melted down their economy by trying to reroll for Ashe 3-star at level 5, they actually hit. And so that has now allowed this person to win streak through the rest of the game. And this Syndicate player is going to win, even though the Blitzcrank hook hit the Ashe, but they managed to get to level 9. They have a Zeri in here. They clearly have managed their economy a bit better. They also have Future Sight, which I think they were using to position. And so this is going to end up being a win. The person we're watching is going to get knocked out, and it's actually going to be the end of the game because someone else got knocked out in a ghost round and took 2nd place. Well, anyway, there you go. So we got to see some footage here of this game. I hope that this was entertaining to watch. I hope that you enjoyed seeing this. As I said, there's a written version of this article, and I tried to keep these kind of ideas fairly abstract so that they would be useful across different sets and not pertain to any one set in particular. But in any case, hope this was enjoyable. Maybe this will help you if you're new to the game and help you in your own Teamfight Tactics games. Until next time, have a great week, take care, and I'll see you guys again soon.